If you want to activate your glutes more effectively, here's one thing you very likely haven't considered that makes the difference between success and failure of that glute activation. Now, in order for us to understand this concept, we really need to appreciate how the glute works as we move through the world. And that is that the glute is a hip extensor and also external rotator of the hip. What happens is we start to, yes, extend the hip and externally rotate in that late stance position, as we call it, but we also are going to be side bending our trunk away from that side, which I'm exaggerating for visual demonstration. But what's really important to consider is how that hip extension and glute activation is paired with the body turning towards the other side and also side bending away from that side. Let me give you an example of this visually so you understand what I'm talking about. Let's say I take a step forward with my right leg and now I'm in an early stance position. My upper body is turned towards this side, my lower body is turning towards this side. Now, as I enter a mid stance position, I'm side bent to this side, the shoulder is a little bit lower, this hip is a little higher, and I am still turned towards this side. This leg's off the ground and I'm fully supporting my body weight here. Now what happens in order for us to actually push out of that side is I need to get my glute and my hip abductors to actually push me out of that side. As I move into a hip extended position on that side, this arm comes forward and now I'm turning towards the other side there so I can do the opposite. So we need to pair that glute recruitment and that hip extension with us turning away from that side and side bending away from that side. So this has massive implications for not only just our movement, but our posture and our ability to use our glute effectively in single leg exercises in particular in the gym. Now you may be wondering, Connor, how does this apply to posture? Well, if I have an asymmetrical posture like many people do, almost everyone has one shoulder that's lower than the other. Typically what this means is that we are shifted towards that side and the hip is higher on that side. We're turned towards that side, which means that we effectively can't get ourselves to push out of that side and actually turn towards the other side effectively, because if we could, we wouldn't be stuck in a position that represents us being turned and lateralized over to that side. But if we could educate our glute to push us out of that side while we get our side bending to the other side, then we will be able to open up a whole host of movement options we didn't have before, and we will naturally be able to improve our posture if it's asymmetrical like this. So the key is, let's get ourselves to open up the side that we can't get our glute to work very effectively on. And the way we do that is twofold. First and foremost, teach the glute how to work with propulsion of the lower body. Secondly, learn how to get the ribs down on the side that we're trying to side bend towards and open up on the side that we're shifted towards. Because if you can imagine that we're kind of stuck like this and we can't use our glute on this side, these ribs are down and these ribs are up. We're constantly just opening these ribs more. But if we can flip that and get this to come down and these ribs to move up, then we're gonna have a lot of success. So some people initially need to learn how to just simply use the side abs on the opposite side and learn how to open up this side before their glute will ever work. And many people in these exercises will end up using their ab wall instead of their glute to create that external rotation that we're gonna be looking for there. So here's one exercise I like to use as a precursor in many cases. So we're gonna get in this position where we have a 90-degree bend at both our knees and our hips, and we have this elbow of the downside directly stacked underneath that shoulder right there. So it's really important that we get into a palms up position here. But if you feel any wrist or shoulder pain doing that, you could go more neutral as long as you're feeling this outer bone in your wrist right here in contact with the floor. So to initiate this, Trevor's going to push through the ground. He's going to go up and he's going to feel probably a little bit turned towards the left side, the downside left side there. So as he breathes in through his nose and out through his mouth, he's gonna feel his left side abs engage more because they're working to hold him up here. But as he inhales, he's gonna feel his right side open up a little bit. And he's just gonna maintain that position as he goes through sets of breaths here. The progression here would be to add an overhead reach. So as Trevor goes up into the side plank position, he's gonna reach, directly overhead, but not so far back behind him to where his ribs flare and extend. He wants to be, if anything, just a tiny bit in front of his head. And he just wants to let that arm hang out and chill. He doesn't want to be tensing to reach it overhead. You can let it just kind of relax. And now as you breathe in, you should feel some expansion alongside this right side even more. Finally, the last progression would be to push this top knee ahead of the downside bottom knee once you get into that side plank position, and that will help engage your inner thigh muscle on the downside and try to maintain that with those downside abs as well. If you like the type of approach in this video that takes into account how muscles should be used genuinely as it relates to our movement as humans and how that affects our posture, check out my beginner body restoration program, which I will link down below in the description. It addresses things from head to toe and effectively teaches us how to genuinely move better through the world through the appropriate joint actions with limited compensation. Finally, we can educate our glute to now work with this side that is now bent, this side that is now more open. And here are two of my favorite exercises for doing that. Now, I recommend doing this barefoot so that way you get the best leverage against the wall, but there's a couple of things we need to optimize our setup. We're going to have a yoga block or just something, a couple of books could work, stacked underneath the feet. That's going to allow us to best get the foot contacts we need for this exercise. We have a 90-degree bend at both our knees and our hips, so a right angle at both. And we have a very, very light band around the top of the knees. You don't want to use a heavy band. It will not help you. You want something that's pretty light or very light according to the band resistance. And we also have a towel roll underneath the side that's facing the ground. So this will be his left side in this instance right here. And the towel roll is not underneath the hip, but underneath the waist, the lowest ribs right there. And some sort of pillow that will allow you to keep your head nice and neutral and isn't side bending you to one side or the other or shoving your head forward or backward. So everything is in line right here. So to initiate this exercise, we need to first get our rib cage in a good position. So Jacob's just gonna take a nice full exhale through his mouth. Sigh the air out for about 5 seconds. He's gonna feel his rib cage come down. Good. Now, he wants to feel the foot contacts on the wall of his right first metatarsal head and inner heel. That's going to allow him to connect his glute working with his foot. And we want to make sure we're genuinely using our glutes. So the way that we do that is maintaining that ribs down position. He's going to reach this top hip for the wall away from him. So that's almost going to elongate the top side of him right here and crunch the bottom side out. It's almost like he's doing a little side crunch to that bottom side there. So he should feel that without flaring his rib cage, of course. Okay, so to recap so far, we've got the foot contacts on the right side. Left foot is also flat. We have the ribs down, and we have this hip reaching for the wall. He's going to slide his right knee ahead of his left knee, or the top knee ahead of the bottom knee, without ever losing that inner heel or first met head contact. And then he's gonna slightly raise his knee towards the ceiling without ever losing those right foot contacts. So he never wants to roll the outside of his foot. He wants to make sure that he's maintaining those. So if that's as high as you can get, that's totally cool. You just wanna make sure you're going forward first and then up. And if you do it right, you should feel your lower butt cheek on this side, this top side here, working really well. So Jacob is going to breathe in through his nose, out through his mouth, nice and relaxed. Check in with yourself. Is your neck activated? Is your low back activated? If it is, relax, because all you want to feel is this lower right glute working, this lower glute on the top side working, and maybe some downside side abs right there. So that'd be his left side abs. By far the biggest mistake here is people are going to want to use their top side ab wall to help them lift that knee up. So they're going to crunch here to get that. The reason why we have this reaching away is so that way we don't do that. So it's important that we keep our rib cage down, but we still have this intention to reach away. It may help you to take this side, this downside elbow, and push it into the floor to help you get a little bit of those downside side abs, but ultimately just keep the intention to keep all this relaxed in this ab wall while reaching this towards the wall. And that'll allow you to still feel that glute working really well. The other common mistake we see is the setup. So people will start too far away like this, and now they're kind of sliding their leg like this, and it just doesn't work at all. So we want to make sure that we're forward folded enough. We want to have at least a 90-degree angle right here, if not maybe just a tiny bit less than that, to optimize our ability to push our foot arch into the wall and use it with our glute. To set up for this exercise, we're gonna be facing away from the wall with our back. And we have some steps right here. This is probably about 10-ish inches of height. It will vary depending on your own individual length of your limbs and your shins, etc. But we need to be able to get far enough away so that way when we bring this foot back and get it in contact with the wall, you have a 90-degree bend at your knee here, and you're keeping your knee in line with your hip. So it's not so low where it's dropping the knee down or something like that. It should be nice and in line right there. And we have a 90-degree bend at the knee and the hip on this downside as well. We also have a pillow underneath Trevor's lowest ribs right there. His hip is flat on the ground, but the pillow's just underneath those lowest ribs to give him a little bit of side bend or thoracic abduction on that side. And Trevor's just also going to passively support his head so that way his head is nice and neutral. It's not shoving forward and it's not retreated back. Okay, now, it's important that we get a genuine amount of hip extension that we have access to. We'll show you what common mistakes look like later, but what it should be is generally for most people, a straight line from Trevor's knee to his hip, to his shoulder, to his head. And if he can't get into that position without feeling his ribs flare up, then he needs to get closer to the wall. So Trevor, if you could just get a little bit closer. There we go. Now he's not gonna have a perfectly straight line up here, but he will be able to still leverage a push into that wall because that's his own realistic, genuine active hip extension range. So you're gonna have to play around with it a little bit to see where your range is. But let's say that Trevor could get into a fully hip extended position. So what he's gonna do is he is going to first roll his top hip forward right there. So that way, his pelvis is perfectly facing the wall over there. And he's going to feel his inner heel and first metatarsal head on his foot that's on the wall, his right foot here. And as he does that, he is going to exhale, and his ribs are going to come down just a little bit. Okay, now he's in a nice neutral position. Feeling the first met head and inner heel here, he's going to reach his right knee forward, not losing that inner heel. And as he does that, he should feel a little bit of glute max activate on that right side. And if he's up for it, if he can handle it without losing that foot arch, that inner heel and first met head on the right, he's going to externally rotate his knee a little bit. But if you can't do that without your foot coming off the wall, that's okay. Just have the intention to get that hip extension and the knee going that way a little bit more. So what Trevor should feel is the glute max working, and as he exhales through his mouth fully, he should feel his side abs on the downside, the left side activate. And he's gonna take that and go through breaths, and probably about 5 total. So inhale through the nose, you might feel the right side stretch out a little bit. Exhale through the mouth, he's gonna feel his lower left abs working well on the side there. As a progression, what you could do is add an overhead reach. This will give you more thoracic abduction and side bending to that downside, which is great. But you need to make sure when you reach overhead, you're not reaching behind yourself because that's just gonna extend you and flare your ribs. Reach out in front of you a little bit and just let that arm hang out. No tension in it. That'll just let you open up that right side, that top side a little bit more as you go through this. The other progression you could do is as you get that right glute on, your hip is rolled forward, you can push your outside heel of the downside right there and just lift your knee just a millimeter or 2 off of the ground. That'll kick on your inner thigh muscle, your adductor on that downside leg. So now you've got internal rotation on this side, external rotation on that side. And you got some nice side bending there. And if you can maintain that for 5 breaths, you're doing great. But again, remember, it's not too much knee lift, just a tiny, tiny bit. The most common mistake here by far is the setup. So again, straight line from head to shoulder to hip to knee. If you can't get in this position without feeling your back arch or your ribs flare, then you don't have enough hip extension to be in this position. So we want to get closer to the wall. You can adjust just by simply scooting closer, and that will allow you to leverage your glute a lot more effectively. The other most common mistake is to watch out for this hip rolling back or even too far forward like that. Again, if you lose that straight line here or something near that, you're probably going to affect what's going on at your hip there. So make sure that your pelvis is facing perfectly to the wall away from it. So it's parallel to the wall. I'd recommend doing the exercises in the order presented to you today for about 2 sets of 5 slow breath cycles. We want to educate our body that what we're doing is safe and it is an efficient way to do things. So please stay relaxed through the exercises. And if you want maximal efficiency, do that both in the morning and at night. I hope you enjoy.